Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole. Am I excited today? Yes, I am. We have a guest on. We've been talking about having this guest on for a while, and we picked the perfect moment, the week that his new book has debuted. And what an interesting book it is. So let me tell you who my guest is. It is none other than Don Lemon, a trailblazing journalist, author, and media commentator whose influential career has shaped the news landscape over the past 30 years. Known for his incisive reporting on major events, from the Sandy Hook tragedy to the riots of 2020, Don has earned widespread acclaim, including the Edward R. Murrow Award and multiple regional Emmys. His previous book, This is the Fire: What I Say to My Friends About Racism, was a #1 New York Times bestseller, highlighting his powerful voice on social issues. His latest memoir, I Once Was Lost: My Search for God in America, just released this week, and it offers a heartfelt exploration of faith and personal transformation. After his tenure at CNN as both anchor and co-host, Don now hosts The Don Lemon Show, continuing to engage and inspire audiences with his insightful commentary. Today, we're going to talk about his book and so much more. Please join me in welcoming Don Lemon.
Harriet, how are you? Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
I am so happy that you are here. This, like we've been talking about this for a minute, and it's just perfect timing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm so excited about this book.
As you should be. So, Don, one of the hats that I wear is teaching people how to tell their story and how to say the right thing at the right time. Like etiquette is part of it. And one of
Mhm.
the things that we always tell people is do not talk about religion or politics in like and my man just wrote a whole book about religion. And I love as you talk about it, you just put it right out there. We're gonna talk about God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to say so many people are uncomfortable in talking about their relationship to God. If they come from a faith-based community, how they believe, what they believe. I mean, there's a lot of angst. And why did you just go for it? Go directly there to talk about God?
Well, it's my style to go directly there. And I think that has been the largest part of the reason for my success. The biggest part of the reason for my success is because I just go there. And I think people find that refreshing because they're interested and they want to hear from people who are authentic and people who actually just say things. People say, oh, I can't believe you said that, but I'm so glad you said it. So I went there because, Harriet, as you know, this all started with the moral majority back in the 80s and 90s. This sort of infusion of religion into our politics and so-called what they call morality. And so it started with that, and then it continued on through the Reagan administration, and then it became the Tea Party. Is when I was in news, became the Tea Party, and the Tea Party became MAGA. And there was so much hypocrisy in our politics and so much of a push, especially by evangelicals, towards a theocracy, which is a total opposite of what America should be and what America is about. There's supposed to be a separation of church and state. We should not be making laws that govern people around religion. And they were infusing, not only had they infused religion into politics or blurred the line, they completely trying to erase the line. And then the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it was at that point I said, you know what, I've got to do something. I was having a crisis of faith already because of the death of my sister in 2018. And then after the Dobbs decision, I said, you know what, we're going to have to talk about this, because if we don't get a handle on this, then we're going to become a theocracy, and that's going to push us further away from God and further away from democracy.
You tell a story very beautifully about someone you call Fiona,
Mm-hmm.
who why don't you just tell the story? Because I think it's such a moving story that brings to life, people have all these philosophies about abortion and put their stake in the ground in different ways without really having a sense of what people's
Right.
lives are like and what the needs may be. Can you share Fiona's story?
So Fiona is a friend, and as I was writing this book, and as the Roe v. Wade was overturned, I started talking to my friends about what it meant. And I just wanted to listen to women on this subject, because as I write in the book, I said, basically, I think men should just shut up when it comes to this. But that doesn't mean that they can't be allies. We should shut up, meaning we should listen to women, because abortion, as they call it, I call it women's reproductive rights. It's not just about unwanted pregnancies or surprise pregnancies, or whatever that might be. It's about a whole host of issues as it relates to women's health care. And so I was talking to my friend, her name is not Fiona, but I called her Fiona in the book, just for privacy. And she shared this story. She said that back in I believe it was the 80s, she said, after the whole scare video of, the fetus, when the Reagan administration came out with the whole scare of the fetus inside of the womb, apparently screaming and in pain because there was a divorce. It was called the silent scream, because there was because of an abortion. It turned out to be a lie, and it was propaganda. And so she said she went to the hospital. She was in her, I think it was her second or third trimester, I forget in the book. And she said she went to the hospital because she was having some issues with her pregnancy. And the doctor told her that the baby was incompatible with life, that it would not survive outside of the mother, and that the baby's organs were growing outside of its body. And so she was in pain for days. They couldn't give her water because they may have to do emergency surgery. They couldn't give her food because of that reason as well. They couldn't give her any sort of medication because that would speed up the baby, and it would be seen as a late-term abortion. And so she said she was in pain for days, and she was screaming, "Please help me, please help me. You've got to make this stop. I can't stand it anymore." And they told her they couldn't do anything. So finally, after days of excruciating pain, obviously the baby, the heartbeat stopped or what have you. But she said until that was happening, the nurse was saying, instead of praying for, asking for an abortion, you should be praying for a miracle. The baby was not going to survive. She was at risk of sepsis and at risk of death, and she could not get an abortion. She said she was a Republican at the time. She was a churchgoer at the time. She says, I have not been back to church, and I am not a Republican anymore. I'm an independent. I will never vote against a woman's right to choose what is right for her body. And there are so many, many stories like that.
It's such a powerful story. And I mean, just to put a point on it, that was a nurse. This was a medical professional telling her you should pray.
Right.
And this is back to the, church, and in this case, the medical profession, church and state, people putting on the wrong hat at the wrong time, right? What hat should you be wearing based upon your professional role in a given moment? Now, I would love to
What
have
about the Hippocratic Oath, right? That you're supposed to, right? Do no harm.
No harm. I'd love for you to address how Vice President Kamala Harris, the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, addressed this topic at the debate.
You want me to address it?
Yes, I want you to share your opinion on that.
I think she obviously, as the kids say, she owned, Harriet, that part of the discussion.
She really did.
And, she called the former president out on his BS, on how he has flip-flopped all over the place on the 6-week, time limit for abortions for women. Basically in one day going back and forth 3 times. And so, he said, well, 6 weeks was too short. And then he said, after he heard from his evangelical followers and constituents that he's, basically he sounded like he was for abortion, he changed his mind. And then he changed his mind again. So I thought that she owned that part of it, where she talked about women, I'm just being honest here, bleeding out in cars and parking lots because their medical professionals can't give them help because it's against the law and they're afraid of going to jail. And so I think she brought that home for, I believe, if not every single woman in the end that was watching, most women who understand that. And Harriet, I believe conservative women. I think Republican women will go into the polls and vote for Kamala Harris because they understand that there is no law on the books that tells a man what a man can do with his body. But there are laws on the books now that tell women what they can do with their body. How is that fair? And I thought she did a great job of pointing that out. And she did not let her foot off the gas when talking about this Very important issue in a way that a man, especially Donald Trump, cannot talk about it and cannot relate.
Yeah, I thought it was really powerful. It also made me think about something, sort of going back to your book, but in a particular way, thinking about what happens when people have their actual experience. You know, it's one thing to have these platitudes, have these beliefs that you follow, and then when someone in your family has a challenge, when someone
Right.
in your life has a challenge, suddenly you have to think about it differently. What I'm thinking about right now, what has come to mind is Dick Cheney and his family. You know,
I know where you're going with this. Liz Cheney and her sister.
yes, this change, the fact that this conservative Republican vice president, suddenly, certainly against LGBTQ, as so many say that they are, and then he has a gay child. And then, oh, now what do I do? And you address this, what happens in you. There's the reality, and then there's the dogma. And Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney have just endorsed Kamala Harris. So we see all this shifting of consciousness as people are recognizing like what life really is as opposed to what the dogma is. And I think that's part of what you address in your book, dogma versus reality. Can you talk about that?
I can, but first, let me just tell you this. When you said when it happens to people in your life, I forgot to tell you, Fiona's husband was there, and so it not only just affected Fiona, it affected her husband and her entire family. He was there crying, and so yes, it does affect your family. Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney not only approved this message, not only endorsed the Vice President Kamala Harris, they said quite specifically, we are going to vote for her. So I think that even ups the ante a bit. You can say I endorse her and I denounce Donald Trump and his policies, but to go as far as to say we are going to vote for him, I think speaks. That's a whole different thing for me.
Yeah.
So I tell this story, Harriet, through a sort of just a coincidence, so to speak, if you can say it that way, an accidental meeting of someone on an airplane. And I had just been writing, God is good, right? So I
Yeah,
had just been writing about my meeting and studying with the Jehovah's Witness as a child. In the book, I was writing about that. Jehovah's Witness came around. My dad was in the garage, which was at the carport, and he said, "Oh, this woman is here to see you." And so long story short, I ended up studying with the Jehovah's Witness. So I was sitting on the plane last fall, and I asleep, and I woke up when the dinner thing or the lunch thing came down the aisle, and I started talking to the man next to me who was a Jehovah's Witness, and he turned out to be a gay man, and we turned out to be around the same age, and we started having a conversation about him coming out as a young man and telling his parents that he was gay, and then they basically ostracized him and they wouldn't speak to him, and he has no relationship to them. For many families, if it does, they believe if it doesn't if they don't have to experience it, then it doesn't exist, right? So that happens to so many families, and so it started to exist for the Cheneys in their family, and they
yes.
handled it one way. They decided to change their stance on homosexuality and same-sex marriage, right? But for this other family, the staunch Jehovah's Witness family, that didn't change for them. They decided to push their child away and to ostracize their child. He told me that he went back after years to see his mom. He knocked on the door. She recognized him. She hugged him, and she thought that he had come home to tell her that he had changed his ways, his wicked ways, right? And he said he had not. He came home to tell his mother that he was getting married to a man. And she and the dad said, we can't accept that, and they pushed him away again. So for certain families and for certain people, it makes a difference if it's close to you, if it's someone that you love, if it's a family member, if it's a friend. But for other people, because of this religious dogma, it doesn't make a difference. They push people further away.
Which is absolutely heartbreaking. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole, and we are talking to Don Lemon. He is in the house talking to us about his new book. So powerful. I mean, one of the things, Don, that you have done is just rip the band off. You keep it real. And from the beginning, so I didn't know this. I don't know if other people knew. I did not know that you grew up in the church the way that you described. Chapter 1, you are taking us to church. You are taking us to church in Louisiana. It's like real church. It's
You have to listen to the audio version, because in the audio version, I go there, and I described. I was like, as I was writing, and I was doing the brum 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 of the organ and the piano, bum bum
yes.
bum, and then the pastor comes in and out, and he goes, and the Lord said, dun 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 dun. The Lord said today in church, dun dun dun. Can I get an amen? And you know that sort of thing, right?
Absolutely,
I wanted
absolutely.
that to come across in the book, so I hope that it came across in the book. But you have to listen to the audio version, because I really felt like I was back in church.
So guess what? I have the actual book, but I have been listening to the audio version. So I
Right.
know what you mean. It's so good. Sometimes audiobooks are better because you get the intonation. It is you delivering the book. It's really something else. And these talk about, not letting people know about your sexuality for a long time, for many years. As you even described, some of your friends call you the straightest gay man they know. Which, hey, this is in order to build your career at the time that you did, that was very important. But also, people don't talk about their religion. They run neck and neck.
Mhm.
You talk about your religion as you were building your career. Was that something that was part of a regular conversation?
Not necessarily, because look, I don't wear my sexuality on my sleeve, and I don't wear my religion on my sleeve. And people,
Mhm.
when people say, do I need to know that you're gay, or do I need to know what you do in the bedroom? And I said, no, you don't need to know what I do in the bedroom. But what is that picture there? And he goes, that's a picture of my family. I said, who is that? He says, that's my wife and that's my children. And I said, well, why can't I have a picture of my husband and my children and my dogs? That doesn't mean you know what I'm doing in my bedroom. And I'm not I'm not wearing it, on my sleeve or out in the open for you to have some sort of intimate understanding of what I do sexually. That's not your business at all. And so it's similarly to me, it's the same thing with my faith. Yes, I have a faith. I may have something in my office, maybe a cross, maybe something in my office, but it doesn't mean that I come to work every day and I speak to you about my religion and my faith and what I do, how I worship on Sunday, or whenever I choose to worship. So, did people know that I was a believer? Yes. But as I write in the book, Harriet, I'm not churchy. I don't go to church every Sunday, and in large part because of some of the teachings, the doctrines, or the way that people interpret the Bible and Scripture. And so I choose not to subject myself to that. But I am a very faithful person. I have been since I was a child. I was a Baptist child. I grew up in the Baptist church, and I went to Catholic school. So it was all about God every single day of my life. I had catechism in the Catholic school. We prayed before we went to class. We prayed before we went to recess. We prayed before we went to lunch. We prayed before we went home. We did. We went
I
to
believe
mass every single Friday. And then Saturday was usually my day off from it. And then Sunday, I was back in church, in my Baptist church, going to either the morning service in the morning at 7:45 a.m. at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, or the evening, the
right.
sundown service at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And in between that, there was Sunday Bible study. And then in the summer, there was vacation Bible study. So yes,
You were immersed.
I was immersed, but I don't have to talk to you about it, because I know that that is something that is personal to
Mhm.
me. It's how I conduct myself. It's how I treat people. It's how I treat myself. It's how I carry myself. But it doesn't mean that I have to push my religious beliefs on to you.
I have close friends, a married couple, two women, who one of whom has been very religious, very involved in her church, very active, and she just had to walk away, she said, because the dogma was saying, "You don't belong. You don't
Yeah.
belong here. We don't love you. We don't respect you. We think you're a sinner." And it broke her heart because she could not figure out how to be part of her church community when she felt this hate. This happens to a lot of people. And you describe in your book how you have found a way, maybe not so much about church, but to hold on to those beliefs, those scriptural messages that resonate with you, even as you have faced a lot of discrimination.
Mhm.
How have you navigated that?
Well, because I realize that what I realize what it is. It's all in the interpretation. And
Mm,
people interpret scriptures usually in the way that they want to interpret them. They instead of seeing God in other people, they're always looking for their image, right, in God, or trying to create God in their own image instead of the opposite way. And so I realized that basically people have been co-opted by the church and by certain people who want to stay in power, who want to control, and by and also it's money,
mm,
right? And so I choose not to feed into a system or even pay into a system that doesn't recognize my right to live as a happy, open, emancipated, God-fearing, God-loving person. So I just don't feed into that, but I understand why people do it, but I don't have to associate myself with that. I've tried for so many years to pray the gay away, Harriet, to try to get people, to force people to understand how I felt and to get people to accept me. And then after a while, what you really have to understand is, what I've come to understand is that God, Jesus, as a Christian, accepts and loved me, and I was created in his image. And what I choose to do is to find God in the image of God in other people. And
mm.
once I sort of shifted that to trying to get people to see God in me, and I said, well, I'm just going to find God in other people, that changed my whole attitude. I don't have to get people to accept me. If you don't want to accept me, I'm going to carry myself and conduct myself in ways that are acceptable to the person, the being, and the religion that I worship, the faith that I have.
That's powerful. There are so many sentences that stand out in your book. So I've pulled a few because I want you to address them. You say, "What role has God played in the history of American racism?" What a big question.
Ah,
What
I,
did
I,
you learn? What did you learn? 'Cause you did a lot of research. What did you learn in answering that question?
I learned a lot because how was I talking about how did I bring the racism part? I brought the racism part up as I was talking about walking down the street, remember, in walking up Park Avenue. And I
Oh,
saw
yeah, please tell that story. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, okay. So I'm walking actually down Park Avenue. I'm walking to, as you know, the Lowe's Hotel, you know where I'm talking about, on
Yep,
Park
yep.
Avenue.
Mhm.
And so I was walking my dogs, and I had on a hoodie. And I
And
think
you
I
just
just
got a
I think I
Brunello Cucinelli hoodie.
Brunello Cucinelli. I had on a $1,200 hoodie, right? And so and look, it's not like I want to say, because I'm rich or whatever. I had a clothing allowance because I was on television. So I could afford to buy nice clothing because they expect you to look nice on television.
And
So
by the way, let me just add in here because why that is important. Good, you explained the clothing allowance, but also it's about image. It doesn't matter how
right.
expensive that hoodie was. Keep going.
Right. Okay. So I had just finished walking my dogs, and I took a walk around. I was like, I'm just going to take a little walk. It was a nice, cool, brisk evening, and so I'm walking down Park Avenue, and I see this man that I know who had been on my show a number of times, and I saw him about 15 feet away, and I said, "Oh, hi, how are you?"
Wait, forget you got your hoodie up.
I have my hoodie, and he he barely looks up at me, and he puts his hands in his pocket and he goes, "No, thank you." And he quickens his pace. And I was like, okay, that was weird. And I won't say his name, but I said, blankety blank, it's Don Lemon. And he walked for a few more steps and he turned around and he goes, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." But it was obvious that he was embarrassed because he realized. And then, I talk about, I forget how I put it, the sort of pedestrian racism that we do every single day, that how we preach, love and whatever, but then we hate and we have wars, and how we preach, openness, and then we divide and we separate and we judge people. And so I use that story to what that experience that happened to me to go into the story about how we carry ourselves, and how we pretend that it doesn't matter, and that how we use scriptures in the Bible to sort of bolster our own racism and our own prejudices and beliefs about other people who don't look like us. And mainly, I mean evangelicals, white nationalists, when it comes to people of color, because that same Bible, and you know, listen, there's so much to go. I talk about the slave Bible. You know, the slave Bible, there were passages that were left out of the slave Bible because they didn't want slaves to be informed or educated about what the Bible actually says. They wanted to keep people enslaved. And so I believe that white nationalists and evangelicals, even now, believe in that. And if they pretend that they don't, but they conduct themselves in that way, and with churches that are not integrated, with not having any sort of relationship with people of color or experiences, or living in segregated neighborhoods, or condemning diversity, equity, and inclusion, or trying to ban books. So I use that experience that happened to me to go into all of those hypocritical things. And those are the things about Christianity and about religion and about faith that just infuriate me. And that's one of the things, one of the main reasons that I wrote the book. And what did I wanted to say to you about that experience? Oh, I forgot. It just slipped my mind.
Well, there's one thing that I think is important, because you do say that you don't necessarily think of this man, certainly not as
No, he's one of the good guys.
yeah, he's one
He's
of the
out
good
there,
guys.
he's out there and he believes that he's trying to do the right thing. But it is just so prevalent and prominent in our society that it
Yes.
forces us in many ways. Again, that word co-ops, it co-ops us to do the wrong things and to make the worst assessment about people. He made the worst assessment about me, which is usually the wrong assessment, but is the most extreme assessment, that I was a panhandler, that I was I was a Black person that shouldn't be walking where I was walking or in the neighborhood I was in.
And, we hear these stories so often. When I interview parents of Black boys, I
Yeah.
always ask them, what do they teach their sons in order to be safe? Which is sort of this impossible thing, because you want them to be strong, you want them to be courageous, you want them to engage their power, and yet here you are, Don Lemon, walking down Park Avenue, and thank goodness this was a good guy. Thank goodness this wasn't Florida or Louisiana,
Right.
and, it's a vigilante who thinks that you're gonna steal something,
Yeah.
with a gun in his pocket. Even someone like you are a Black man, therefore, in some ways, you're in peril. And how is that still true?
It's even much more subtle than that, Harriet. Um, I think that people have a perception about Black men that they have carried since childhood, that's been taught to them. And so I believe even in the workplace, right? It's not just on the street. It's not just in a situation that they might feel physically threatened. I think even in everyday life that people are threatened, and they feel threatened by African American men. How we, how we express ourselves. If you look at the style of music that has become so popular, right? To have that sort of free expression, that devil may care, let me tell you about it. That's what rap and hip hop is about.
Mhm.
And there are certain people, especially white people, who, it's like, oh my God, taken aback, and it scares them, right? But then all of a sudden they adapt to it and they realize, okay, we can make money off of this. So then it becomes acceptable. But even, Black men get white lady tiered all the time, right? You know what I'm talking about? Oh
Please
my God.
describe.
I feel threatened. Why are you here? Why are you speaking to me that way? Well, I'm trying to tell you how to treat me. Other people tell you how to treat them, of someone who's white, and you don't start crying, or you don't, feel a certain kind of way about it, because you're just not used to a man of color, or a Black man specifically, telling you, don't treat me that way, or I am your equal, or I am your supervisor, or what have you. And so we get that all the time. And it is, people treat us differently. The rules are different for Black men, just as the rules are different for Black women in a different way. Look at what's happening with Kamala Harris. Donald Trump can say and do whatever he wants. He can hold a press conference and demonize women and talk about, they're so ugly, there's no way I would sexually assault them. There's no way that I could get away with that as a Black man. There's no way that Kamala Harris could get away with that. And so the rules are different for us, and to pretend otherwise, I think, is just ignorance, or just it's willful ignorance, or you're just dumb if you can't see that. But in this day and age, when you express those sorts of opinions, people call you a race baiter, or they say that you see racism every place you go. Well, perhaps if you stop being racist, we wouldn't have to see the racism in a lot of places we go.
Imagine that. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole. We are talking with Don Lemon, who has just written a really powerful book, I Once Was Lost, My Search for God in America. Why that title, Don?
The title was one because that was one of my grandmother's favorite hymns. It's Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And so that's part of the lyrics there. And it also describes my crisis of faith when my sister accidentally drowned and died in 2018. And I wondered, well, why would God do that? Why, God is supposed to be good and benevolent and all of that. Why would he take my sister away? Why would he allow someone to drown? And then, quite frankly, when I would say, why would God allow someone like Donald Trump, who is the worst of all, who has the worst of all human behavior, would allow him to become the leader of the free world? And then I realized that it's not necessarily God. I'm giving away some of it. Because I usually say in interviews, I don't want to tell people if I found God, because I said my search for God in America. But it's not necessarily God who's doing it, because we have free will. And so, God is running things, but he gives us free will to be able to do certain things in the way that we want to do them. So I don't believe, as people say, as the MAGA folks say, that somehow God is using Donald Trump, who is a bad person, to display his will here on earth. I don't believe that at all. And as a matter of fact, I know that's not true. So I had a crisis of faith, and I started writing the book in 2022. And as I said, because of what was happening in politics. And then I left CNN. I got fired from CNN. And that wasn't necessarily the crisis of faith that was the impetus to writing this book. But it forced me to put the book down, and it forced me to to go inward and to dig deep about why this was happening to me. Why would God allow this to happen to me? And then I said, well, when people say, why me? And now I say, well, why not me? Right? So there's a certain reason that this is happening to me. So I put the book down. It became a much better book when I went back to it. Not that I was glad that, those things happened to me at CNN, which I do discuss in the book, but I was glad that I chose to harness that experience to make this a better book and more relatable to people, so that people who are going through things can realize that there is hope on the other side, as long as you have faith.
And I think that's such an important point. You are also incredibly candid in the book. I do think that while you were always candid, the depth of candor probably shifted based upon all of the experiences that you had had. You admit that you were depressed after losing your job, and in the way that it occurred, it was public, it was rude, there was, I mean, that's
Inaccurate.
the way
There, as you know,
that's the way to put it.
you're a public person, as you know. People write things and that aren't necessarily true, because our libel and slander laws are so high, right? The bar is so high in this country that to even try to fight them would just be a waste of resources, and also you would just be giving more light to things. I wish that I could have defended myself in more than I did, in a better way. But as you know, as a person who deals with contracts, contractually, I couldn't, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
I chose to write about it in this book, but not in a way that it was sour grapes, because I'm very protective of my former colleagues over at CNN. I worked there for a long time, and they are the best in the business, and I love them, and I want them to do really well. And they were going through a rough time as well. Maybe not the same as me, but they were dealing with it, things in their own way. But yeah, I do write about it, and I'm candid about it. And I talk about one experience that I'm telling you is, about white lady tears that happens to us in the workplace. Um, and
Which
also,
some people call Sharon.
yeah, Karen, and also politics. had a lot to do with what happened to me as well at CNN. They wanted the network to move in a certain direction. They wanted it to move to the right, and I just don't think that I was part of that plan because I c- I can't sit there and put election deniers
Mhm.
and bigots and people who demonize women and who disparage women and disparage all people. I could not put them on the same level as someone who is acting in good faith. I don't believe that Joe Biden, who may be slowing down in a natural way as an older person, is the same as someone who is found liable for sexually assaulting a woman or for defrauding the people of New York through about lying about his business and who is guilty of 34 criminal counts. I don't believe that those two things are equal, and I'm not going to pretend sit there as a journalist in any form, whether it is on a cable news desk or in my writing or in whatever. I'm not going to pretend those two things are equal just for false equivalency because they're not equal.
So, Don, this brings up a topic that came up in Trump's last election, this notion of fake news and what's happening because we have so much social media and now AI, and just what happens when you go down a rabbit hole and then you get the same thing, more of the same. It has become increasingly more difficult for people to figure out what is true. You know, the news is supposed to be sharing the truth. That's the Hippocratic Oath for journalists, right? To tell the truth, except for it is not real for many. How does the average person figure out what is true?
Boy, that is a really good question, Harriet Cole. Let me tell you, because my experience that since I've been doing this new thing where I go around and I just talk to people on the street. I
Yep,
just walk around and I just talk to people, and I'm like, today I'm going to pull out my microphone and I'm going to go talk to people. Okay, I'm going to the convention. I'm not going to just fly to Chicago, right, and be in my bubble. I'm going to drive and I'm going to stop in
that is
cities,
so powerful.
in towns on the way, and I'm just going to ask people how they feel about the election. It was a simple question. How do you feel about the election? How do you feel about the election? Who are you voting for? Blah, blah, blah. What are the issues that are big to you? Where do you get your news? It's very difficult because many people now get their news through social media, which
That's
has
right.
no editorial standards, right? There's no editorial rigor. It doesn't have to be truthful at all. And some of the biggest influencers, as they say, in this sort of digital space on social media, podcasters, streamers, are people who don't deal in facts, and many of them are conservative, and it doesn't matter. They are people who are ignorant of the facts, don't care about it, and they have huge followers who actually believe what they're saying is factual. That is a problem. That's problematic. So then you have people believing all of these things that are wrong and inconsistent about vaccines and about the pandemic and about how, you know, what is actually happening with the economy. And they don't know that gas prices are down. They don't know that unemployment is lower under Joe Biden than under Donald Trump. They don't understand that the whole reason that Donald Trump had to give them a stimulus is because he handled the pandemic so poorly. And they don't understand that Joe Biden also gave them a stimulus check. And they don't understand that the stimulus check that came from Donald Trump or came from the government actually came from a Democratic Congress that was led by Nancy Pelosi, but Donald
That's
Trump just wanted his name on the check. They don't understand all of those things.
I
But
forgot about that. Yeah, he did put his name on that check.
he held it,
He
but he
is
held the check
master
up.
he is the master of
Marketing.
manipulation of the media. Oh, man.
And we know, Harriet, because we've lived in New York City and we see his name on buildings all over. And some of those buildings he doesn't even own. It's just marketing. He puts his name on the buildings, and he puts his name on things. Look, the man. I noticed it the other day. I was like, my goodness, I would be so embarrassed. And I said, maybe I shouldn't. But I would be so embarrassed to just have a big lemon on the side of my plane. First of all, you know, I don't have a plane, but if I had one, I mean, it's just Trump on the side of his plane. How big does your ego have to be? Or how, whatever that Obama hand gesture is that you know what I'm talking about, does that have to be for you to have your name, your giant name on the side of an airplane and on everything that you do and on buildings? Look, it works for him. I just find it odd, and I find it a bit gauche.
And
So
you know, This
Yeah.
notion of conservatism, I really feel like what's happening in politics today is giving conservatism a bad name. Conservatism shouldn't be the worst thing in the world. People should be allowed to have whatever their views are. It has become so well, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're going back to slavery days, like this desire with this notion of we're not going back, but the going back is to when there was complete control, when the haves were a tiny group of folk and they owned everything, they controlled everything. That's how we want it to be.
You're hitting on it. And listen, remember in the book I write about manifest destiny, right? Where
Yes,
that gave it was a religious doctrine that gave um, uh, Christians and white people ownership over everything in America. That's
right.
through religion, right? And so we're going back to that time if we're not careful with the banning of books, where it doesn't teach you about the actual history of the country, about the contributions of African Americans, which is American history, and the contributions of Native Americans, which is an American history. Quite frankly, the only, and I hear this all the time, and it infuriates me, real Americans are people who supposedly live in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, and they work in, in coal mines, or they work at, manufacturing and all of that. That's real Americans. The only real Americans, quite honestly, if you want to, are Native Americans. Those are
Right.
real Americans, if you want to. All right. Everybody else is an immigrant, whether you came here, by of your own volition, of your own will, or you were brought over as a slave. You were someone who was either brought into this country willingly or not willingly. Native Americans were here. And so,
You tell a story, Don, in the very beginning of the book. I love the journalist in you because you have all these quotes. And so it's like, this is real. Let me tell you why. In the very beginning, you talk about what happened when the people first came from Europe to the Caribbean and then to what is now the United States, and then went back, and the king said, "Oh, all the lands that you have found, plus all the ones you haven't found yet, are mine. And
mine,
I'm
yes.
going to declare that the whole world is mine." That level of arrogance, and then it worked. It worked. It worked.
Yeah, it worked because they also did it through religion as well. That's the whole point. I'm so glad. That's why I'm so glad you're saying that. That's the whole point, is control. It's control. And if you look at if you look at the Catholic Church, look at how much money the Catholic Church
Mm.
has, right? And the Catholic Church can do some really great things, but also it can do some things that are very harmful to people. And the whole point of it, that people should understand, and I think, which is the biggest issue, is that people look at the Bible, because I'm talking about Christianity, right? I'm talking about evangelicals, as if it is a book of facts and that it is concrete history. It is not a history book. It is actually not a factual book. It's a book of parables. It's allegory. It's fiction. It's stories that are supposed to be lessons to teach us how we should live with each other, how we should treat each other, how we should love each other, how we should conduct ourselves as good people. It's not like this happened on this day and there's a 100% record of it. Some of it, there are some records in there, but it's not a book of facts. It's not a book, actually, it's a library of different books, right? And so I wanted to get that
People
across to
are
people.
trying to burn you on the stake right now, Don Lemon, for
But
saying
it's the
that.
truth. I mean, we have to hear the truth, and people try to burn me on the stake. And just because I'm saying it, it doesn't mean that it's not truthful. And just because something that you learned is false, and you may be offended by it, but it's the truth. And perhaps if we realize that it was the truth, that we would all be better. And this whole experiment, if you want to infuse in some way religion into this American experiment, perhaps this would improve this sort of grand experiment of democracy here in America, if we just realize the truth about that. That is the whole reason that we became America, for religious freedom,
For
for people to
religion.
be able to worship in ways that they want to worship, and for the separation of church and state. And now we're trying to establish, especially evangelicals, a theocracy. And that is pushing us away from democracy, and it's pushing us away from God.
Mm. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole. Don Lemon is keeping it real up in here. We are talking religion, just straight out talking about religion, and I love that. You know, Don, so my daughter's in college right now, and she loves reading about mythology and philosophy, and so she's now at the Nordic mythology, and she's like, I'm not quite sure how much I like that because they're just copying off of Egypt exactly. Duh. So that's the point, as long as you can understand that. But
Mhm.
this notion, whether it is mythology, whether it is, if we look at all, and you write about this in your book, all of the major religions of the world, but also mythology,
Mhm.
it's storytelling. It's
And it's
story
similar stories. The stories are similar. If you look at the story of Jesus,
all identical.
similar, and there are thousands of years before Jesus and you know the birth of Jesus, there were very similar stories about the same thing. And she's doing the Nordic thing. You know, I write about Christmas, right, and where the Christmas tree came from, and that
There's so
Jesus
much
was,
juicy stuff
oh
about
my
Chris
God,
in John's
yes,
book, by the way.
yeah, and that you know it's that the idea of that you know the reason that it was an issue for Mary was that Mary was became a single mother without a husband, right? And so
You're
that
lighting the
wasn't,
flames on you right now, Don.
I know, and it wasn't just that, you know, Joseph wanted to get her out of where she lived because he wanted to save her life. Because if you were a single mom then or an unwed mother, right, that meant death, right?
Stoning to
And
death,
so
right?
and then so that's how this whole story about a virgin birth came about. It wasn't just that Joseph was a good enough man to try to save this woman from whatever, but it had to become this whole mystical thing about a virgin birth. And so sometimes things are just, it would have been okay if Joseph was just a good man who saved the life of this woman. You know, and so I won't go too far into it. You have to read the book, and you know,
You did.
people are going to stone me.
But this is what I'm saying from the beginning of our conversation. You went all the way in, you did your research, you have your assessment of lots of things that are part of history, including a very deep dive into the Bible. Look, the fact that you have evaluated who Mary was is,
Yeah,
but take my hat off to you, my brother. I
and
just
I said I come from a religion that believed in human sacrifice and in bloodletting and all of that stuff, and I talk about it, and I go, and you know what that was? That was Christianity.
It is. And so right before we go, here we are on the precipice of, this is a history making moment. We have a few days left before the election. What is it that you think people need to do, to think about, do, say? What is the responsibility of each individual at this moment?
I think the responsibility of each individual at this moment is they need to, and I say this, they need to have a come to Jesus, right? About who we are and exactly where we are in this country. And if our religion and our faith and our God aren't expanding us and making us better and bigger and more open and more humane, more human, then what good is it? Why
Mm.
are we practicing the type of faith that we have? Why are we practicing the type of religion that we're practicing? And I talk about it in this book about Molech and about sacrificing of children, and then realizing that there's a much better and a much more humane way that you can practice your faith without being judgmental and without sacrificing our fellow men and without sacrificing our children. And I'll make a very pointed point here: without sacrificing our children, especially with what just happened in Georgia, to gun violence and death at schools, without sacrificing our women, our wives, our mothers, our sisters, our nieces, our cousins to the possibility of death because you want to control their reproductive rights. We have to be better than that. We have a responsibility. And I think on November 5th, we need to vote with our conscience and not necessarily what our religious beliefs have taught us, because again, those aren't necessarily factual, they're beliefs. Beliefs and facts are different.
Wow. That's a drop the mic moment, Don Lemon. But instead of just dropping the mic, y'all, this book, I mean, first of all, it's really well written. I love your storytelling. And as I said, you've got a lot of history. You've got a lot of book references. You've got things for people to read and contemplate after. Thank you for putting your all into this. It really is a powerful book. Congratulations, and look forward to seeing how it all unfolds.
Harriet Cole, you're the best. I love you so much. I'm so honored to be here. And people can see, for those who can see and you're listening, the art behind you is so beautiful and inspiring.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank
I
you, my
see you.
dear. I love you
I
too.
see you, Harriet Cole. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for joining today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Don Lemon's new book just came out. I Once Was Lost: My Search for God in America. And by the way, you do not have to be a Christian to read this book and to enjoy this book. It is for everyone to really, take a bite and chew and think about all the things that are in it. So thank you for joining us. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.